Hello everyone, my name is Manuel Marcano, and I'm a game designer. Today I'm making a video about some of my thoughts on RPG design. Because of how excited I am for Persona 5, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, I wanted to talk a little bit about a series that I've been playing for a very long time, Shin Megami Tensei. Now let's just get this straight out the door. This is not a history video. We're not really going to be talking about dates and facts, but more about mechanics and emotions. I am going to talk briefly about the history of the series. The original game, Megami Tensei, was released by Namco, then known as Namcon, and was based off of the book Digital Devil Story, Goddess Reincarnation by Aya Nishitani. Most of the people seeing this likely know what a Megaten game is, but for those of you who don't, they're a series of horror RPGs. Most of you who do know what Megaten is probably think I'm crazy for calling it a horror game. So I want to take a moment to explain how Megaten games use mechanics to evoke similar emotions to the ones we experience across various horror media. First and foremost is the idea of safety within horror. Many of these games start with the idea that the player is safe within a mundane setting. The player must choose to enter an unsafe setting. If the setting was unsafe from the outset, that would simply make the player feel stupid. Each of the games starts in a situation that is very mundane and removed very much from demons of any kind. This harkens back to movies like The Exorcist, Poltergeist, and Night of the Living Dead. In Night of the Living Dead specifically, Barbara and Johnny have a very droll conversation about basically nothing. This culminates in a scene where Johnny is teasing Barbara, and her very silly little fear becomes a very real one. Even without any kind of supernatural context, this is a horrific situation, because it goes from normal to abnormal quickly. While thematically the games can often shock the player out of comfort, the mechanics add an extra layer of discomfort that makes the transition even more jarring. Often in Megaten games, players are forced into losing fights. They'll also be placed against enemies that are far stronger and act as an obstacle. Players will also find themselves on very tight resource management of hit points, magic points, maca, and items. Demon conversations within themselves are very disturbing and uncomfortable. The player not only wants something from them, but needs something from them, and talking to them could just end in violence, which could destroy meaningful progress. Even small choices within dialogue can have lasting effects and leave the player with no easy decisions. Despite this, Megaten as a series has a very diverse sense of play. While the series has many spin-offs, each one manages to feel different while keeping some of the core mechanics we mentioned earlier. Each game manages to stay true to the overall philosophy and still offers a unique setting or emotion. So let's dive into the different types of games. First off, we have the proper Shin Megami Tensei series. They generally emphasize a ruined world that has been touched by God's wrath. They also stress a lack of general resources. Players are presented with chaotic, lawful, and neutral avatars, while themselves sit on an unseen scale that varies based on their decisions and playstyle. Choices often range from chaotic to lawful, with a vastly different ending depending on which of the avatars the player supports. The player party is made almost entirely of monsters, making fusion and conversation a major lifeline. Strange Journey, which came out for the Nintendo DS, would be considered this if it had taken place in Tokyo, the setting being a major part of the series' identity. Next up, we're going to talk about Persona. Most of the Persona series tends to take place in an other space or parallel dimension. Examples of this would be the dream world in the original, the dark hour in Persona 3, and the television space in Persona 4. The games tend to focus heavily on schools and various other mundane activities that can affect your stats. Friendship and social link mechanics serve as an alternative way to diversifying the player's party. The reason for this is because the party itself is made mostly of human characters with demons attached to them. You cannot talk to monsters, and thus using and leveling become more important. The social links are so important that themselves they affect what skills the player can have and what personas they can use. While on the subject of Persona, let's talk a tiny bit about Persona Q, which plays like an Etrian game. In these games, the party is made up exclusively of player characters. The first-person dungeon crawling that was prevalent in the earlier games is here in full force. While a mashup of Etrian Odyssey and Persona, it manages to take core Megaten designs. Sticking with the DS train, let's take a look at Devil Survivor. Devil Survivor is a strategy RPG with isometric views that switches to turn-based battles for combat situations. It uses the push-turn system to allow players extra moves within combat situations. Each unit is made up of a player character and 2 demons. Demons themselves are acquired through auctions because the player cannot talk to demons while they are fighting. Because of this, demon fusion becomes extremely important. The setting of the Devil Survivor game is a modern-day Tokyo where the player deals with localized horror elements set against the mundane of everyday life. This leads me to a very different type of setting, but one that can be found in the Digital Devil Saga. DDS happens in a completely ruined world. The party consists of player characters that themselves become demons. Each of these player characters also has a human form capable of using weapons and items. No choice in this game is right. There are only violent and painful ones, making the player very uncomfortable. Finally, I want to talk about the Devil Summoner series, which originally started on Saturn. These games emphasize a world in which demons are not yet in control, but are hatching a plan. Demons themselves can only exist with magnetite. This new resource dramatically changes the dynamic of your playstyle. Keeping too large a party could leave the player exposed if they run out of magnetite. Keeping a party that is too small could leave them vulnerable to different enemy types. The stories of these games revolve around the possibility of a horrific event. The gameplay emphasizes this by keeping the player in an uncomfortable position heading into every encounter. What will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, both within the narrative and for the player's progress? Over the years, Atlus has tried to create a children's version of Shin Megami Tensei. This culminated in the creation of Demi Kids, also known as Devil Children. It's a more light-hearted take on the series, but it also dilutes some of the core systems and mechanics. Conceptually, it functions similarly to Digimon Frontier, where players fuse with monsters. As a matter of fact, the English release of Demi Kids happened while Digimon Frontier was still on the air. Truth be told, I always hated Digimon Frontier, and Demi Kids was never really my thing. Digimon itself, though, could be framed as a kid's Megaten. The reasons for this are an emphasis of fusion of Digimon, a lack of resources, and players that are often faced with outright death. Even looking at the anime series, the characters are often taken from safe situations and placed directly in danger. Really, if you look at Digimon Story on the DS, all the way up to the game on the PS4, Cyber Sleuth, they function as children's Shin Megami Tensei. The characters usually end up fighting amongst themselves because of some idealistic difference. Well, that's all I've got for this week. We really like feedback, so please feel free to comment. Voice your opinions on here or contact me on Twitter. You can find me at HurakanWorks. HURAKAN Works. Also, be sure to check out Treachery in Beatdown City at beatdowncity.com. We'll be releasing some details on the game shortly, so please get hype. Thank you again for listening and supporting. You're awesome.
Get over here!